Okay, Amanda, why does our language matter?
Oh gosh. Well, language is the medium with which we construct our reality. With language, we have no identity, we have no community, we have no beliefs.
Yeah.
Whole ethoses can be constructed and perpetuated with language alone, even if you're not in the same room as a person. But we take it for granted because it's invisible, and we pick it up so organically that we often fail to stop and think about why we use the language we do.
So I think anybody who loves to write or read loves words.
Yes.
I think about words all the time, and as I was preparing for this, I was like, why do I love words? Why do I love language? And I realized that it doesn't just shape how we perceive the world, but our words shape how people perceive us as well. It's the story that we're telling.
1000%. Oh yeah. Well, to get nerdy, there's this linguistics theory, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
Well, say it again.
The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. I can't believe I'm getting into this already,
No,
but
it's fascinating.
it's the theory that language doesn't determine our thoughts, but it heavily influences them. And there's another idea, the idea of linguistic performativity, which says that language doesn't simply reflect our reality, it creates our reality. So if you think of, wedding officiant saying, "I now pronounce you married," that is the most sort of obvious example of linguistic performativity. But every time we say something, we breathe reality into being. And language is what we use in our own heads to tell ourselves the story of who we are. And I find myself doing that a lot, as you mentioned, as a writer, as a lover of language. I narrativize the living daylights out of my life. And that can be a really beautiful and empowering thing. In my book, Wordslut, I talk a lot about the pros and cons of labels to describe your identity, your gender identity, your sexual orientation, etc. But it can also be limiting if the story you tell yourself is confined to these linguistic boundaries.
So that was actually what I was just going to say. If you don't have the vocabulary for something, I remember taking a political economy class in college, and there were all these financial terms I'd never heard of, and the professor said, "I'm not going to grade you for the first third of the course. I just want you to learn this new vocabulary." And I just kept thinking, thank you, because I didn't have the words to describe what he was talking about. And from a very sort of preliminary level, if you don't have the words to describe what your ambitions are or how you love somebody, how limiting.
Absolutely. I mean, my favorite book when I was a little kid was My Pocket Thesaurus. I got a thesaurus for my birthday, and it cracked my world open, and something that I really aim to do with my work, and something that people tell me is meaningful to them, is when I'm able to articulate a frustration or a theory that has caused, a lot of turmoil or strong feelings and sort of hard to organize thoughts in the mind of a reader, that finally they're like, that's it. That's what I've been thinking all along. And I've had the privilege of being able to talk to so many academics for my work, from linguists to sociologists to folklorists, whose work often gets contained to like the niche of academia. It's on this high pedestal of academia.
Right.
And a lot of what I do is package their ideas in a way that is a lot more accessible to the everyday reader.
You wrote, "Our words send invisible signals telling people who we are. In the wrong hands, speech can be used as a weapon, but in the right ones, it can change the world."
I'm so earnest. I wrote Wordslut when I was like 25, 26.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but how old are you?
31.
31. I'm 30. And I feel like something happened when I turned 30. I feel like I became so my 30th birthday party, this is kind of a tangent, but I had this 90s rom-com themed birthday party, and I dressed up as Cher from Clueless. And I remember at the end of the night, I was sitting with just a circle of my dearest friends who were there until like 2 a.m. or whatever. And a close friend of mine who was actually a linguistics major with me at NYU. She was very good at syntax. Shout out Tori. But I remember she like put her hand on my shoulder and she was like, "Amanda, you were always meant to be 30. And I'm so glad that you're finally 30.
Yeah, you caught up with your brain.
Maybe that's it or something. But, you know, when I reflect on the ways that I would write when I was 25 and 26, it feels like me, but it feels like such a sort of sparkly, wide-eyed version of me. And this has to do with the topic that we were discussing earlier, which is like the language that you yourself use changes as you get older. And there's so much like faux feminist self-help advice out there about how women need to, you know, lay off the vocal fry and the uptalk and the like every other word and stop using so many exclamation points in emails. But that is all futile, because if you don't sound like your authentic self, people are going to drag you if you are a woman or a feminine presenting person, either way. And something that I've really learned post 30, like whatever it is, like 9 months into being 30, is that like, I don't care. Like, I'm
yourself.
going to embody my
We're going to get into the vocal fries and all of that.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Okay.
Does language change culture, or does culture change language?
They work simultaneously, hand in hand. As culture changes, language pushes culture. But you can't force someone to use language a certain way and expect their beliefs to change. It kind of has to happen the other way around. But one of the reasons why older folks, the okay boomers of the world, now I sound like a boomer using that like obsolete slang terminology, but the reason why older generations are consistently so critical of the way that young people, particularly young marginalized people, young women of color, use language, is because it's a sign of social change. It's the grounds of social change quaking beneath them, and the language is symptomatic of that. You know, the truth of the matter is that the most marginalized populations have always used language as a form of power in a culture that doesn't give them a lot of other power tools. And young women living in cosmopolitan environments, or now I think maybe it's a little different because the internet has democratized language, made it so much more accessible all over the world, but consistently young women are our language's linguistic innovators. Every generation proves that to be true.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Wait, how so?
Well, there are a number of theories as to why this might be. One of them is due to some combination of nature and nurture. Women are slightly more attuned to one another's linguistic needs, and so they, you know, collaborate to invent language. Another is that just socially, women feel a little more free to be flamboyant with language. Consistently, linguists have found that the least innovative linguistic population is the non-mobile, older, rural male. And they've given these people the acronym NORMS, which I find entertaining.
That's incredible.
The norms are the least innovative. But the theory
linguistically.
yes, linguistically. The theory I like best is that, you know, women, especially women of color, have always used language as a social power tool. There's this story that I tell in Wordslut about a linguist named Susan Gall, who in the late 70s traveled to a Hungarian-speaking village in Austria. It had ended up on Austrian soil after the borders had changed post-World War I. This was really bad luck for these Hungarian speakers, because now all of a sudden they were citizens of a country that spoke German. This wasn't such a big deal for the men in the village because their working class blue-collar jobs paid pretty well in mines and on farms, but women couldn't easily access those jobs. If they were to be employed that way, those environments wouldn't be hospitable. So they had to get what were called pink-collar jobs, like as a secretary. But those jobs required them to learn German. They had to pick up these new linguistic skills as a means of climbing the socio-political ladder so that they didn't have to be attached to a husband. And that's a sort of microcosm for how women in all different communities all over the world use language, whether it's code switching to a different dialect or learning an entire new language or innovating with slang or creating a secret code language like you find in queer communities to avoid persecution or to avoid abuse. Language in marginalized communities has always been a really material form of power.
I love your book, Wordslut. I'm going to show everybody.
Thanks.
I love this book so much.
Thank you.
You say it's a feminist guide to taking back the English language. And you start off with a bang. The first chapter is a bunch of slurs.
Yes.
Can you list a few off for us?
You want me to curse on your podcast?
Oh, yes.
Gladly. Well, what I found researching this book and what I learned in college, and really my college education in feminist sociolinguistics was the backbone of this book, was that basically every word in the history of the English language that has ever been used to reflect femininity or to describe women has at some point been used as a slur. And there are just way more feminine skewing slurs in our language than there are masculine skewing slurs.
We have bitch.
Bitch, slut, cunt.
Whore,
but even things like
freak. So,
totally, even things like tart and harlot, these sort of old-timey terms that we now think of as passé, spinster, these terms, many of them started out as perfectly innocuous, having neutral or positive meanings, and they went through a process of semantic change known as pejoration, where a word starts out meaning something totally harmless and then over time devolves to mean something abusive. And that process really reflects something about our culture, our prejudices. The word slut back in Chaucer's day was used to describe a slovenly, untidy person and was sometimes used to describe men. Chaucer used the word sluttish to describe male characters in his poetry. And now it's a sexual slur, and that is the fate of so many feminine skewing terms.
You write, if you want to insult a woman, call her a prostitute. If you want to insult a man, call him a woman. It's true. We reject anything feminine. And also, this word diva always bothered me because I think there's no male parallel.
Totally. Oh, there is no male parallel for most female. I mean, think about it. For slut, we have man slut, but I think we can all agree that that is much jokier and more harmless than slut. I mean, these terms have been wielded to keep women from power and to keep women in their place for generations, for decades.
Well, one thing that I learned from your book, and it's something you just mentioned, is if you have to put the qualifier man in front of something, it means we think of it as female. So
default female.
Man bun, guy liner, you talk about.
Man bag.
Right. Because
male nurse. I mean, it doesn't just have to do with insults. It has to do with professions. I mean, this language is not arbitrary. It says something about the gender and power dynamics of our culture at large. I'll give one more example of a minimal pair of one word that meant something masculine and neutral and one word that meant something feminine and neutral, where the masculine term ameliorated, became more positive over time, and the feminine term became more negative. How about master and mistress? So master and mistress back in the day were just female and male heads of household, but master ameliorated. It became more positive in meaning. Now it's someone who is, an expert in a craft, master chef. Mistress went the other way. Now it means a head of a brothel. So that is just one of many examples.
A side chick.
Or a side chick. Exactly.
So you say words and power. Language has always been used to reflect power structures. The example that you give is we think of models as women, so we say male model.
Exactly.
If it's a man, nurses, prostitutes, all default female.
Female doctor, though.
Woman scientist.
Woman scientist. My mom is a woman scientist. Shout out.
This one was really interesting to me. You talk about mompreneur and girl boss. And you say it may come off like an emblem of girl power, but there's implicit sexism attached.
Oh, of course. Well, first of all, girl boss is inherently diminutive. We would never say boy boss. We would never call a grown adult man a boy. So there's something infantilizing there. But also, per our entire discussion, when you have to tack a feminine qualifier as the prefix onto this word boss, there is this explicit implication that a boss is male by default. Some people think girl boss is this sparkly term of empowerment, but I think at this point it has been co-opted and bastardized enough by the multi-level marketing industry that we could probably retire it for good.
Well, I think this brings me to my next question, which is about reclaiming words.
Yes.
So you did it with the title of your book, actually. It's called Wordslut. You reclaim the word slut.
Yeah, I know. I've spent so long sort of censuring these feminine insults, but language is nothing without context. Language doesn't mean anything without the larger picture. And with a term like slut, when the population that term has been used to suppress, then turns it around and says, no, I'm going to use this as an in-group form of empowerment. It can start there, and then you as a woman can choose yourself only to use slut in positive contexts, to never use it to describe a woman as contemptibly promiscuous, but to say like, oh, I'm about to have like slut era. I'm seeing it now. The term slut era did not exist when I wrote Wordslut, but I'm seeing it become more and more reclaimed. And I proudly identify as a word slut. I love it when women say, like, oh, I'm about to have like the sluttiest night out, like wish me luck. And then, as the next generation comes up, only hearing slut in positive contexts, that is the work of reclamation.
So I have to tell you, because you talk about reclamation versus abolishing words.
Yes.
And my instinct was like, just abolish it.
Just get rid of it.
I don't like when somebody comes up to me and is like, hey, bitch.
Yeah.
I'm offended. And it happens, and I'm like, Danielle, it means something different to them than it does to you. Like, let go.
Oh my God, you're completely entitled to that. And we're all going to have very personal relationships to these emotionally charged words. You're not wrong. There are feminist scholars who think it was a mistake for me to title my book Wordslut. No, there really are, and I've heard that through the grapevine. I think that I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what you did was brilliant marketing, because it brought about that.
No, but it brought language to our generation in a way that we haven't had in a mainstream way. It was brilliant.
I appreciate that. It was a journey arriving at this title, Wordslut. I was feeling really coquettish about it for some reason, even though the chapters of my book are titled things like, fuck it, an ode to cursing while female. I was so nervous to title it Wordslut, but the voice in the book.
Because you're a scholar.
Yeah, well, I mean, I am, but I'm also the conduit between academia and the zeitgeist. Like, I don't have a PhD. The reason why I felt almost a responsibility to write this as someone with a bachelor's in the subject matter but hasn't been in academia for the past 10 years is because I can sort of use my internet know-how to inspire people who would never otherwise pick up a linguistics book, something with a more in-groupy terminology heavy title. But Wordslut, we can all kind of guess what that means.
And I only know this because I read your book, but for anybody who hasn't yet, in-group and out-group, when you talk about in-group means like we're women, so we're in-group, out-group is men in this case.
Yeah, and there are so many in-group, out-group dynamics, and they're all going to have very individual experiences with these words. I mean, one of the most successful examples of a reclaimed slur is the word queer, not that long ago.
That's a great point.
Yeah, that was just a homophobic slur. And now it's largely, this umbrella term. It can have many meanings, but the queer community, And my hope personally is that the same fate will come of slut and bitch and all these other slurs. But there are still some people who find queer really offensive because they remember a time when it purely was.
Okay, I have this diabolical conundrum that I need you to solve.
Oh my God. We'll see.
So the word woman and the word girl.
Yes.
Then you have man and you have boy. There is no word to describe someone like me and you. Are we a woman or are we, there's a gal.
A gal.
But nobody really says gal. Like if I say,
I love gal.
For instance, years ago, I really made an effort to stop saying, hey guys.
Yeah.
Because I'm not speaking to just men.
I don't say it anymore either.
Right. I abolished that one. I didn't reclaim it.
Hey cowards. Just kidding. Kidding.
So, hey guys is out of our vocabulary. Hey everyone, but that doesn't feel warm. So I want a term that's for women that's not me saying, hey girls.
Yeah.
Because it's not hey women.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you can get really creative with it. Not everybody is going to like it, which sucks because
that's a great point.
Everybody likes hey guys. There's this cozy masculine solidarity with guys, with dude. And that's because there's this cozy solidarity with just masculinity in general. We just sort of prize it more. It's more chill.
I love hey y'all, but I'm not Southern, so I can't get away with it.
I think it's okay. I think y'all is Southern, but nowadays it's also kind of woke.
And convenient.
Super convenient.
Hey,
it's only
y'all.
one syllable.
It's great.
It's amazing.
Okay.
But I walk into a room and like, depending, the best thing you can do with language is read the room, and not to be sort of cantankerous and curmudgeonly about it, but to be curious about it and to want to listen and to want to adapt. And the statement that requires its own context, because having to code switch and having to adapt is something that speakers of marginalized dialects like African American vernacular English have had to do out of necessity for a really long time, forever. But it's something that people of privilege should learn how to do as well. You should be able to walk into a room and be able to tell, should I address all of these people as, hey guys, hey everyone, or hey fuckers?
Oh my God, aggressive. I mean, we do it with children, right? We don't speak to kids, so we're used to code switching in some way. Okay,
totally.
Gender stereotypes subtly hide in language.
Absolutely.
I'm fascinated by the subtleties of language. So women as an object is one of the patriarchy's largest tropes.
Oh yeah.
This one, really, in your book, wow. So you talk about penetration, and you say it implies and reinforces that sex is from the male perspective. The opposite would be envelopment or enclosure. How different would life be if we referred to sex that way?
Isn't that a mindfuck? Literally.
Penetration is from the male perspective.
Oh yeah. I mean, this even applies to medical terminology. I mean, we use the word vagina to describe, oftentimes when we really want to say vulva. Like, the vagina is just the canal. Straight up. Like, you don't shave your vagina. The vagina is inside of you.
Wait, speaking of, how many words are there for vagina versus penis?
Oh, I mean, I talk about this in the book because I have a whole genitalia naming chapter. It's fascinating stuff because the slang that we use to describe sex in our bodies just says something enormous about how we approach sex in general.
Right.
So there are way more terms for penises than there are for vulvas. I'm bringing back vulva.
Bring it back, honey.
Bring it back. I like it better than vagina. Like, I just don't like the phonetics of vagina.
It's a crunchy word.
It's crunchy, it's cringy. But, well, and we can unpack why it's crunchy and cringy, but, really, like, the metaphors that we use to describe a penis versus a vulva in slang, they are so disturbing when you unpack them. Like, a penis is like a pocket rocket or a meat sword. It's like always something violent. And a vagina or a vulva is like a meat wallet or like a fucking axe wound. It's so
I've
ugly.
never heard of either of those.
Oh my God. Well, there was
You're a wealth of information.
There was this lexicographer named John Green who put together this timeline of almost all of the slang terms he could find for our genitalia across the gender spectrum, dating back centuries. And there was this very consistent pattern where, like, sex was always violence, a penis was always a weapon, a vulva or vagina was always this like empty space for a penis to go. It's eye-opening.
Now, we've discussed how women are talked about, but we haven't talked about how women talk to each other, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah.
You say that women use hedges, which are I feel, and affirmations like right or yes. And men might hear those as signs of interruptions or insecurity. I didn't understand what you meant. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, sure. Okay, so maybe you've come across some self-helpy type article online that's like, ladies, we need to stop saying like, I feel well, actually, because it's making us sound inauthoritative and you need to like reclaim your linguistic power.
Huh.
I mean, I hear this so much because I have a podcast now, and certain listeners, not just men, women who've been conditioned to accommodate to the patriarchy, will be ultra sensitive to hedges and filler words, thinking they're just a sign of insecurity or vapidness or stupidity, when really linguists have found, doing empirical studies, that not only do men and women use hedges in equal measure, though not in the exact same way, but each one of these hedges serves a very specific purpose and or multiple purposes depending on the context of the statement. So whereas a man might use or right, a tag question like that, sometimes to communicate insecurity, we're not going to be as sensitive to that because men enjoy a position of default power in this culture. And so when we hear them say like or use upspeak or vocal fry or hedges, we're just going to default hear the sound of authority. Meanwhile, when women do it, they're under this microscope.
Chapter 4 is women didn't ruin the English language, they like invented it. So you say today's sharpest linguistics, however, have data suggesting that teenage girls speak is one of the most loathed and mocked language styles, but it's actually what standard English is going to sound like in the near future.
Oh yeah. If you want to hear what language is going to sound like across the board in 20 years, listen to a young woman.
Okay, I don't know how I feel about this. I feel great that women are leading language. That's fine to me. But in general, I find people speaking improperly all the time. Like my cousin and I will joke, we watch cable news and everybody uses her and she wrong. And we will, like, he taught me this because he's way better with grammar, but this is us is improper grammar. It's this is we.
Okay, but here's the thing. We all love that gotcha feeling of catching someone in a grammar infraction.
No, because I do it wrong all the time too. Like
Right.
I'm not like trying to be like, you did it wrong. But I just feel like, okay, keep going.
Well, my question is, what is improper grammar? I mean, oftentimes grammatical policing is classist.
It is.
Racist, sometimes even sexist. I mean, the grammar rules that we have in English were created arbitrarily by a bunch of stuffy white men who were working at the printing presses at the time and were in a position of privilege to be able to come up with the grammar guides. And they based a lot of our grammar rules on Latin, just because there was, you know, a glamorization of Latin, even though they're really confusing. I mean,
So
this whole
right. Like where did it come from? If you go back to the origins, who made up the rules?
yeah, these guys
Right.
working at grammar guides. And Latin, you know, was very romantic to them. So the reason
right.
why we're so confused about when to use like she versus her or you versus me, like people say all the time between you and I instead of between you and me. And that's known as grammatical hypercorrection. And you often find a lot of grammatical hypercorrection in the speech of women of a lower socioeconomic class, because to our point before, they're trying to ascend the socioeconomic ladder. Language is their best tool, and sometimes they overshoot the mark and will say, you know, oh, between you and I, even though like technically it's between you and me, you and I goes as the subject of the sentence.
But it kind
like,
of sounds right.
it sounds right. They're doing that because it sounds fancy, because they're half right about how to use this grammatical rule. So we need to sort of check ourselves sometimes. And I often find this, you know, if someone's getting into, say, a political debate on Twitter or something like that, if someone typos in their tweet, someone will be so quick to critique their grammar rather than the content of their statement. So it's really low-hanging fruit and oftentimes misses the mark and seems really pedantic, and pedantry is really just prejudice dressed up in like a fancy academic uniform.
That is so brilliant. You are right. That is so important.
You're like, I'll change forever.
I know, but you're right. It's like, who made up the rules and why did I follow them? My 6th grade English teacher, Mrs. Felix, taught me, and so now that's it.
Mrs. Felix.
And also,
how do you feel about her?
So much. Well, I've learned so much about language from people who are of different class, different race, different religion, all of it.
And what's considered grammatically incorrect now may very well be accepted by grammar guides in the future. For example, there is a hullabaloo, less so now, but very much when I was writing Wordslut, about singular they. And so many people argue against gender-neutral singular they, non-binary folks using they, them pronouns because it is ungrammatical, it makes no sense. But first of all, we all use singular they without even noticing it all the time. Someone left their umbrella under the table. When we don't know the gender of a person, we use it perfectly naturally. Jane Austen used singular they throughout her texts. For a long time, grammar guides, again, like generic singular he was only based on the Latin rule. And it's sexist. Why should he be the default singular pronoun?
It should just be they.
It should just be they.
Well, I want to unpack this a little bit more because we talk about changing language, and the takeaway from the book for me, the main takeaway, aside from all the awesome examples, but the main takeaway of the book was that you should feel empowered by language instead of silenced by it.
Absolutely.
And the changing language is an important part of that, because using they, for example, versus he or she is a part of that. So what do you say to people who are like, it's just not in my vocabulary. I didn't grow up using it, and I'm uncomfortable, and I don't mean anything poorly by it.
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the intention of the person that I'm talking to, but by and large, I would just encourage people, rather than getting defensive about language or afraid of linguistic change, because it's inevitable and it's going to happen whether we like it or not.
It's happened since the beginning of time.
Oh my God, of course. Try to think like a linguist and be curious and excited about it, because language will embrace you if you embrace it.
If you criticize someone's language, you are oftentimes criticizing someone's identity. The two go hand in hand.
Oh yeah.
Those are your words.
I'm like, that sounds so true.
It is so true. And you say a lot of slang comes from innovation and also oppression, solidarity, community, and survival.
Oh yeah. I mean,
so talk to me about slang.
Totally. Well, almost all of our beloved slang in English comes from African American vernacular English, everything from the use of bad to mean good to the phrase 24/7. Actually, I spoke to a linguist, a Black linguist for the book named Sonia Lanehart, who told me that the first time she ever saw a white male news anchor on TV use the phrase 24/7, she nearly spat out her drink because she was like, oh no. Like,
well, white people are like mainstream society as well, co-opt Black words all the time.
All the time.
100% woke, all of these were originally Black terms.
Yes, and more specifically, a lot of our most beloved slang terms now that we might think of as like TikTok slang or internet slang, Gen Z slang, specifically comes from ballroom culture, which was a community whose heyday was in 1980s Harlem, New York, where Black and Latinx, Latino, gay and trans drag performers would get dressed up and parade down the runway and use this language as a form of solidarity, a secret code. And
the category is...
Yes, yas, woke, reading, you know, like, it's funny, like, part of the fun of studying linguistics is that you get to talk about so much fun language and use words like cunt and yas and just speak about them in this very academic tone of voice. It gives me,
great pleasure.
It gives me a kick every time.
I love
but yeah, and that language was in a way sort of parodying the language of Black women. So yes, consistently the most marginalized communities who've been oppressed the most will almost need this language, and the creativity is a byproduct of the oppression in many ways.
I really found it interesting to think of language and identity tied. It really is true.
It's so true. I mean,
and culture. Like, I think based on like what culture you grew up with in your household.
Oh, can't you just like clock immediately when someone says like mashugana or uses some kind of Yiddish slang that like only someone who grew up Jewish or like Jewish adjacent in New York or something like that would use, and then you instantly feel simpatico with them. You instantly feel familial with them. And that can cut both ways. Like, you can use language to instantly connect with someone. You can use language to instantly alienate someone.
Yes, and you have to be careful. I've noticed actually because when I interview people, I'm so sensitive to how my words land with them.
Yeah.
And I very precisely feel when my words don't land the way I'm intended. And so you're right. Like
it's true. But at the same time, I also feel like, and the internet makes everyone like so sensitive and really brings out the overthinker in us all.
Yeah.
But in person, in natural discourse between people, we're so good at being able to pick up on one another's facial expressions and one another's disposition. And when you feel as though you've fumbled, and when I feel as though I've fumbled with language, it's easy enough to sort of backtrack and get on the right foot, and because we're not all going to use language right all the time. And my crusade is not to push forward political correctness necessarily, but it's to push forward the idea that language is always changing and that words matter and that we should be attuned to that whenever possible.
Curious instead of critical.
Yeah.
One of the most frustrating chapters is about how hard it is to be a woman in the public eye. In a position of power because of the societal expectations that we place on women.
Yeah.
You talk about something called the linguistic double bind. Can you explain this?
Sure. Well, the double bind is this sort of double-edged sword, this tiny tightrope that women have to walk in the public sphere where, the public stage and authority is something that we've been conditioned to associate with masculinity. And the private sphere and daintiness and niceness is something we've been conditioned to associate with femininity. Actually, I recently learned, researching my current project, my current book, I learned from a medieval scholar that it wasn't considered natural for women to be in the home until the Enlightenment, when we were first discovering science and we, were a patriarchy then, and now all of a sudden science was the excuse for why women naturally belong in the domestic sphere, in the home, away from public life. So our gender expectations for women and our expectations for what a public figure should look like and sound like are fundamentally incongruous because of these centuries of conditioning. So when a woman attempts to approximate masculine authority, she's often censured or criticized for coming across as a shrew, shrill, a bitch, like Hillary Clinton. And when she comes across as too nice, too dainty, well, now she's unfit to lead. And, that might be someone like Sarah Palin, who was unfit to lead for many reasons. Her language use was not one of them. Accent, though.
I don't know. Maybe her language use was one of them.
Yeah, her language use probably was one of them.
Yeah,
probably was, in her case.
I always do a rapid fire, but for this interview, we're going to call it word economy.
Okay.
So can you name 5 English words that are rooted in patriarchal misogyny?
Oh, my God. Okay, hysterical, crazy, girl boss, slut, simp.
Simp. That's a new TikTok
That's a new one.
What's your favorite English word?
Okay, well, I actually have it in my bio, in Wordslut, in my author bio.
Where is it?
It's like, I think it's at the end of the paperback, but I said in there that my favorite English word is the word nook. I love how cozy and plosive it sounds.
What does the word plosive mean?
Plosive means like a stop consonant. Some part of your mouth is stopping the air from moving and then releasing it explosively.
Plosive words are fun words. I like ephemeral.
Ephemeral. That's a beautiful word.
I like whimsical words.
Yeah, I love whimsical words too. I mean, I love
iconoclast.
Oh, those are fun. Okay, so English has 2 sort of categories of phonosymbolism because our language is derived in part from Romance languages and in part from Germanic languages. So for every Latin, fancy multisyllabic sounding word, there's a much shorter, more Germanic sounding alternative. So for example, we have chew, but we also have masticate. You know what I mean?
Favorite slang word?
I mean, I love tea.
Oh, tea. Spill the tea.
Yeah.
Shook. Your language pet peeve.
Oh, I try not to have them. My language pet peeve is when people try to police others' language.
Love it. What is the wildest thing you've ever done for love?
Oh my God, the wildest thing I've ever done for love. Oh well, I've traveled across continents and oceans for love.
A book you think everybody should read?
Wordslut. I'm just kidding.
They should.
A book I think. Oh God.
What's a book that changed your life?
Okay, because a book that everyone should read, I mean, probably a book that everyone should read would be I don't know, Toni Morrison, The Bluest Eye, or The Bell Jar, Sylvia Plath. A book that changed my life, I mean, the books that made me want to be a writer in high school were David Sedaris books.
Really?
Humor essays.
I love that.
That's why my books, even though they're about linguistics, which is, the reputation is boring, I think my books are kind of funny.
They are fun.
Thank you.
Okay, I do a pretty smart question.
Amazing.
So pick whichever one speaks to you.
Oh, tarot.
Mm-hmm. People always choose the card they're meant to get.
Okay, sure. What gift do you most often give? Do I re-gift? Is this a 2-parter?
Mm-hmm.
What gift do I most often give? I do love to gift an experience, a weekend away, a concert ticket.
Can't re-gift those.
You cannot re-gift those, but I also love a quirky sock.
That feels so on brand for you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Amanda Montell, what is the smartest decision you've ever made?
I can't believe I'm like telling on myself here, but I started college as a theater major, and within a few weeks, I realized I wanted to pursue linguistics instead.
So cool. But you're still theatrical. You still bring it out.
I'm a theatrical linguist.
You are.
Yep.
I love that. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is awesome. You blessed us with so much knowledge today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I learned so much.